I said don't move.
I'm just passing through. I'm gonna ask you to lower that weapon.
Like hell you are.
I was so excited when they dropped their first reveal trailer for this. It had become one of those games that I just thought about constantly. I worked at GameStop at the time, and my coworker, one of my buddies, was able to pre-order the big collector's edition for me with the Leon statue. I was all in on this. I took a few days off work just to play it at launch, and back then, I really liked it. Even with some of the changes, I was super into it.
I'll be there! This is out of control.
Then the first day I went back to work, a customer came in who had got the same big edition I did. He was the only other person at my location who was able to even get one, and he was just as excited as me when the game launched. So I'm thinking we're about to have a conversation about the game and be excited about it. But he walks up to trade it in, and tells me he hated it. That was the first time I saw how divisive this game was. I walked in thinking they nailed it, and he walked in thinking they ruined it. So what makes this game so divisive with fans? What was Resident Evil 2 Remake?
And don't make my mistake. If you see one of those things, uniform or not, you do not hesitate.
The RE2 Remake got framed in a very specific way from the moment Capcom revealed it. They described it as something rebuilt from the ground up, and that's the tone you have to keep in your head when you look at what this project is. Capcom approached it like a full reconstruction, built with modern tech and a modern production pipeline from the start. They talked about it as a deeper experience, and they used the word reimagining, which really tells you where their heads were at with this. The point was bringing the same story and the same world forward, then rebuilding the delivery so it lands with the same weight for people playing it now. They wanted it to feel modern to play in a way that still held on to that core survival horror vibe. And the dev mindset is really important here, because the team talked about this like fans. They've said they love the original too. They understood what it means to people who grew up with it. And they also wanted the remake to work for anyone jumping into it for the first time. So the goal becomes pretty easy to explain. Keep the feeling people remember, and rebuild the experience in a way that's easier for a modern audience to get into. The same emotional core, but modern execution. A big part of that intent shows up in what they focused on for the horror side. The developers have talked about making the zombies scary again, and they describe the goal through design choices. How they move, how they behave, the little variations, the way they come across on screen. They wanted fear to live inside the moment-to-moment survival gameplay loop. The kind of game where the danger is something you really feel while you're just trying to make it from one room to the next. They wanted zombies to feel like a constant problem in your path. And then there's the pressure underneath all of it. RE2 is one of the most beloved horror games of all time. It's tied to first experiences and that era where survival horror really locked in. And it's one of those games where everyone has some version of, this is where I was when I played it.
Jesus Christ!
Capcom talked about that weight. They've mentioned approaching the remake through their own memories, and through the fact that longtime fans already have their own version of RE2 in their head. Capcom also tied this remake to years of fan demand. People asked for it for a long time, and the team has said that support really mattered in getting it made. That adds a different kind of weight to the whole project, because this wasn't coming out into an empty room. People already had expectations, emotional attachment to the game, and this remake was always going to run straight into that. So every decision or design choice was always going to get measured against memory, even before anyone had the controller in their hands. So the way I like to look at this game is this. It stands on its own as a full modern survival horror game, and it also exists in the shadow of something people care about deeply. The only way to make sense of it is to let it be what it is first, and then step back and look at where the divide comes from after. This is where you start to see the biggest shift in how the game feels. Perspective changes the emotional feeling of survival horror. It changes how you read the world, read the danger, and how your brain stays on alert while you just move through the game. When Capcom talked about the remake early on, they treated the camera as a real design choice. They looked at the series' history, and they talked about having 3 clear options on the table: the classic fixed angles, the third person, and first person. then weighing what each one could do for the experience. The fixed angles carry a certain kind of feeling with them. They're good at framing, controlling what you see, letting the environment set the mood like a stage. It keeps the game feeling like you're moving through a designed space that's always watching you back. It also comes with a specific kind of readability and rhythm that people still associate with the classic Resident Evil games. The trade-off, though, is that the player's relationship to danger changes, because your awareness is shaped by where the camera decides to sit, and certain moments end up feeling more like you're reading the room than physically being inside it. First person sits on the other end of that closeness spectrum. That perspective puts fear right in your face. Everything feels a bit more personal. Sounds feel like they're happening right inside your head. It's pure immersion, and it can hit harder in that immediate stomach drop way. First person narrows your awareness in a way that can make tension spike, because you're committed to whatever is directly in front of you. The trade-off is that you lose some of that classic survival horror readability. Your character's space, distance, and positioning can take more effort to judge, and certain kinds of interactions and puzzle pacing can start to feel different.
You ain't getting away.
But over the shoulder ends up being a middle ground. It keeps the closeness and it keeps that claustrophobic pressure, and it still lets you read the character inside the world. You can feel the environment squeezing in, while also seeing the body language, the animations, the distance between you and the threat, the way a struggle plays out. It gives you a balance of immersion and spatial clarity that supports that moment-to-moment survival decision-making. In interviews, Capcom also talked about this perspective opening up options for how exploration and puzzles can work in a modern remake, because the camera supports interaction in a room in a really practical way. The concept they kept circling back to was closeness, claustrophobic encounters, the kind of horror where you and the threat exist in the same frame, in the same space, in the same moment. Hirabayashi even described it as wanting that intense struggle between the character and the enemy, with the biter and the bitey visible together. That's the fear language Resident Evil 2 Remake leans into. It puts you in the hallway, you're walking through at a human scale. The walls, doors, sounds, it all feels closer. Your attention stays really tight because the space around you stays tight. And that changes how your brain processes danger, even in rooms you've already been through.
Jesus.
A big part of that comes down to proximity fear. Once the camera lives closer to the character, what's behind you starts to matter in a different way. Your field of awareness turns into something you manage. You're thinking about corners, blind spots, about what you hear, what you can't see yet, and what you might have to deal with if you commit to moving forward. It creates a kind of tension that follows you even when nothing's happening. And then you add precision on top of that, because in this perspective, every decision with your hands becomes part of the stress. Aiming under these extreme situations, choosing when to commit, what's worth a shot, choosing when to stand your ground or when to move. The fear sits inside your control. Your choices feel closer to the outcome, and that makes every moment feel heavier. The fixed angles can create amazing horror. They're great at mood, framing, and control. They can make a hallway feel cursed just by where the camera sits. They can make you hesitate because you don't fully know what the next angle is going to show you. That style has real identity, and it still works when a game is built around it. At the same time though, Capcom was building RE2 Remake for modern hardware, modern expectations, and a huge audience that includes people who never grew up with that style. And when you're trying to deliver that up-close and personal kind of fear, you also need the experience to feel natural in your hands for the average player picking it up today. First person can push that closeness even harder. It can make the fear feel immediate in a way that's really hard to beat. But it also changes how you experience the character and the space and the action because the whole world is filtered through that single view. For a game like RE2, where the identity is tied to seeing the character survive in that world, third person keeps that human presence on screen while still staying close enough to feel cramped. So over the shoulder ends up making sense for what they wanted this to feel like. It holds onto that claustrophobic pressure, it keeps the character in the world, and it plays well for a modern audience without asking them to meet it halfway on control style. That's the reason this perspective matters. It supports the kind of horror they were aiming for, and it supports the kind of player they were trying to reach.
Grab my shoulder.
Don't push it, Rookie.
Okay, just trying to help.
If you've made it this far into the video, thanks for hanging out with me for a little bit. If you're enjoying it, consider subbing. There's a lot more content on the channel like this, and there's always more on the way. You can leave a like too, and drop a comment. Let me know what you thought about the remake. Did it land for you? What worked? What didn't? And if you feel like helping out extra, sharing the video and hitting that hype button on mobile really goes a long way. But seriously though, I really appreciate y'all. Let's get back into the remake.
Her nose, her whole face, it looked like it was rotting.
After you get a feel for the fear language RE2 Remake is built on, the next thing that's important is where that language lives, the RPD. The police station becomes the engine for the whole experience. Every route, decision, and detour runs through it. The layout forces you into this rhythm. You move forward, hit a lock, find a key, and open a shortcut. And the building starts folding in on itself. Routes you barely understood at first become routes you rely on. Doors you ignore become exits you sprint through. Hallways turn into real choices you make on purpose. And that's where a lot of the tension comes from. The station teaches you through repetition. You learn it by surviving it, by getting lost in it, finding the right door, realizing a staircase connects two wings you thought were separate. Spatial memory turns into a real survival skill. The building rewards you for paying attention, and then it punishes you if you get sloppy with that. Comfort starts showing up. You start moving faster, trusting your routes. And that's the pressure machine part of it. The RPD gives you enough structure to build confidence. You start thinking in plans. I'm going to cut through here, grab this, and come back that way. You start getting familiar with the safest paths and the quickest routes. And then the game starts messing with that comfort in a way that makes the building feel alive. You walk through a hallway you've already walked through 10 times, and your brain still stays switched on. You still listen, still hesitate at corners and before sprinting through a door. The station becomes a memory trap. The more you know it, the more the game can use that knowledge against you, because you've built habits inside it. The safe rooms are a part of that also. They give you a second to catch your breath and have time to plan your next moves. That's where you turn your panic into a plan. You come out of them feeling like you've got control again. And that feeling becomes part of what the station plays with, because the RPD works best when it feels like a real place that something's invaded. This version of the station feels physical, it's grounded, it feels like a building with weight and history to it. That really matters in a horror game, because it's scarier when a place like that gets taken over. When it feels like somewhere people worked, moved through, somewhere that should have been normal. Now it just feels wrong. The remake does something smart with player expectation too, especially if you know the original. You already have a mental map and memories of where certain scares are supposed to happen. So the remake shifts things around just enough to keep you on edge inside a world you recognize. A good example of that is the first Licker. In the original game, that first Licker hallway for Leon, that shows up in the B scenario. In A, your first Licker shows up in the Stars hallway. That kind of change matters because it keeps the scare working. Your brain goes in expecting that beat to happen in one place, and the game keeps you honest by moving it. You still get that same jolt even while you're walking through a game you feel like you already know. So the RPD ends up doing two jobs at the same time. It's a puzzle box, but it's also a pressure cooker. It turns the whole survival horror loop into something physical you can navigate, memorize, and still feel nervous inside. And once the station has you thinking that way, the rest of the game starts to hit harder, because every area after this is basically built on what the RPD taught you. Zombies in the remake take a lot out of you, and not even in a dramatic way, just consistently every hallway asks for something. You'll put bullets into them and see the shots land, and they just keep moving. So your shots start mattering more than they do in most games. You start picking targets and moments where it's actually worth spending the ammo. It doesn't take long to realize something. A clean hallway is expensive, but a messy hallway can follow you for the next 15 minutes. So you start playing around them instead of through them. You look for gaps and for timing. You look for the path that doesn't cost you 2 magazines and a green herb. You start making those little survival decisions without even thinking about it, because the game trains you into that mindset. Then there's a dismemberment layer that kicks in too, because a lot of the time, your goal shouldn't be to drop the zombie. You should be trying to just make the situation more manageable. You take out a leg, create space. You turn a threat into something slower that you can get past again later. That changes the whole ammo economy. You're shaping the building so it stays livable, instead of spending your entire inventory trying to wipe every room clean. And even when one does go down, your brain keeps a question mark on it. Bodies hit the floor and you still watch them when you pass, still listen, still hesitate for half a second in case you just turned your back on something that's about to get up. The uncertainty becomes part of the cost too. And then the defensive items start feeling like a second currency. The knives, flash grenades, and grenades. They sit in your inventory like an emergency exit, because if you get grabbed, that's your clean way out. It keeps you moving, lets you avoid a bite. So every time you see a tight group, you're doing the math. Do you risk the run through and accept that you might burn a defensive item, or do you spend the ammo and try to make the hallway safe before you commit to it? Either way, you're paying. The game just lets you decide what you're paying with.
What the hell is up with you?
And that's why the zombies work the way they do in the RE2 Remake. They make survival feel expensive. And then there's Mr. X, and he changes how you move through the station. Routes you felt good about start feeling temporary. Your timing starts mattering just as much as your map. Even when you know where you're going, you're thinking about whether you have time to do it before he shows up. A lot of it comes down to the footsteps. Kadoe, the director, talked about this in an interview, and it's one of the most important details about how he works. Those footsteps are more than just spooky sounds. If you hear him, he's actually close. So the audio becomes real information. It's the game telling you this is in your area now. And they built that sound to carry weight. The director said they mixed multiple recorded sounds together to get that heavy impact, so you really start to actually feel him move through the station. That's where your decision making changes. You start moving in shorter bursts. You don't stand still for as long. You start listening at doors before you commit to a hallway, because you're thinking about where you're going and what your current objective is, but you're also thinking about what you're going to do if you hear those footsteps get louder. If Mr. X loses you, he starts searching. He walks these different routes, checks rooms, moves through the station like something actually searching for you. And if he hears something or catches a glimpse of you, he starts to close in. It was more of scripted moments in the original game. In this, it actually feels like he's sharing the building with you. And sound plays into that in a really practical way as well. Gunfire catches his attention the most, so every time you shoot, you're doing more than dealing with the zombie in front of you. You're making noises in a building that has something hunting noise. That's where the improvisation comes from. You make a plan, you hear a door, you hear a step, and then you have to reroute. Sometimes you take the longer way because it buys you time. Other times you take the risky way because it's faster. Or sometimes you leave an object half finished because staying put starts feeling like the worst option. If Mr. X doesn't find you for a while, his senses get more sensitive. So even the quiet stretches have a timer on them. The longer you go without seeing him, the more it feels like you're borrowing time. And then there are moments where the game forces the encounters. It keeps that layer from turning into something you can fully avoid. The pressure stays part of the station's rhythm. So the overall effect is pretty simple. Mr. X takes a building that you can learn, and he keeps it unstable. So you can still have a route and still have a plan, but you just carry it lightly, because the station can change on you in the middle of it. When it comes to the story in the remake, the structure matters more than the plot details. You already know the broad beats if you've played Resident Evil 2. So what's worth focusing on here is how Capcom chose to deliver it. In interviews, Hirobayashi talked about wanting Leon and Claire to feel like two sides of the same event. The same night, outbreak, two different perspectives moving through it. And the way they approached that in the remake was by tightening the structure into two full campaigns.
Get in! Hold on.
Hirobayashi explained that they simplified the old scenario setup by removing the A and B distinction, and meshing what would have been separated variations into one story per character. He also tied that decision to pacing and repetition, and how story-heavy games land for a modern audience. So the result is kind of easy to feel when you're playing. Leon's run feels like it's built to stand on its own, and Claire's run feels like it's built to stand on its own. Each one has its own pace and flow, its own survival rhythm. The cutscenes show up, they hit their point, and you're back in control. The dialogue stays pretty functional. It keeps urgency in the air and keeps the mood tight. Then it hands you back to the part of the game where you're actually trying to survive. Honda also talked about the goal being the original's horror atmosphere and gameplay, with a big emphasis on exploration and backtracking. That's a pretty clear statement of priorities. The experience stays centered, the story supports the rhythm. Now the trade-off for that structure shows up once you play both campaigns. Leon and Claire line up on the big beats, and some of the details don't stitch together cleanly if you try to treat the two runs like one perfect timeline. One good example is the C4 in the attic. You can blow that up in the A scenario, but then when you run through in the B scenario, you have to blow it up again. And that's where the conversation gets split, because people are reacting to that structural choice. Some people like that each campaign feels complete on its own and keeps the pacing consistent. Other people miss the interlocking feel, the cause and effect across runs, and the idea that your first route sets up the second in a more connected way. The zapping system is usually the first thing people bring up there, because it gave that sense of the story being shared across two playthroughs, not replayed as two separate versions. So I'm not calling this good or bad, it's just the lane the remake picked. The game tells its story in a way that keeps momentum tight and keeps the experience moving forward. Each run feels self-contained. And the flip side is that the seams show more when you try to combine both campaigns into one continuous continuity. That's really the important thing to understand about how the remake handles story. It's there to keep the pressure moving and to support pacing and the tone and survival rhythm. The story's not really the spotlight here, it's the fuel for everything else.
Where you going?
Do yourself a favor. Stop asking questions and get the hell out of here.
When the game actually dropped in 2019, the reaction hit really fast. The critics loved it. It landed in that universal acclaim territory right away. It was sitting at 91 on Metacritic for PS4. It got high scores immediately. And the audience showed up too. Capcom put out a statement saying the game shipped 3 million units worldwide in its first week. So on pure launch level, this thing connected. People were buying it, playing it, and talking about it right away. PC was a good pulse check for that too. The Steam numbers climbed hard at launch, and the player response was strong early on. That's usually a pretty clear sign that the game is landing when people actually get their hands on it. What most people were responding to was the experience. The atmosphere, the tension, the station, the way it made survival feel stressful again. Reviews kept circling the same stuff. How tense it feels to move through the building, how strong the dread is. How good the survival horror pacing is when the game is clicking. But the launch conversation had another thread running under all that praise, the structure. Even in really positive reviews, you'd see people mention the scenario setup as one of the places where the game didn't fully satisfy everyone. And that wasn't only a critic thing. People were having that same argument during launch week too. You could see it online, people loving the game but then circling back to how the runs connect. That's where the split started showing itself. So the reception at launch had two truths sitting together. A lot of people looked at this game and felt like Capcom nailed the experience. A lot of people also had one specific gripe that wouldn't go away. And I'm kind of in that second camp on one main point. The A-B scenario handling is my biggest issue with the remake. The lack of that tighter interlocking structure, the lack of zapping. The way the runs don't always feel like they're feeding each other the way people wanted. That was the one thing that kept coming up in the launch conversation, and it's the one thing that stuck with me too. At the same time, I don't really get hung up on every change. Some things got removed, other things got shifted, and the remake also added moments that hit harder than they did before. Kendo is a perfect example of that. In the original, he's basically a stop on the way to the next thing character. In the remake, that scene has weight. It has a real human punch to it.
She was our sweet little angel.
Mommy.
I was sleeping, honey. Okay.
Same with Chief Irons. He was already disgusting, but the remake pushes him even further into that I hate being in the same room with this guy. I really think Chief Irons is the most terrifying and disgusting monster in the entire series.
You need to learn to listen.
Leave me alone. Just please.
Time to teach some manners.
So when I look back at launch reception, it makes sense why the game got the praise it got. It reviewed like a hit, it sold like a hit immediately, and also sparked a specific debate the moment people finished their first run. And that's really what the launch reception was, a huge win, a loud audience, and one structural choice that a lot of people couldn't stop thinking about, even the people who loved it. At this point, after everything we've talked about, the remake kind of settles into a very specific place. Because time has done what time always does. It strips away the launch noise, the hot takes, the expectation arguments, and it leaves you with the thing itself, the game you actually played. The feeling you carried after the credits and the parts that stuck. And where RE2 Remake lands now, I feel is pretty clear. It's a modern survival horror benchmark. It's not perfect, but it commits. It knows what kind of experience it wants to be, and it builds itself around that all the way through. It understands space and tension and how to make movement feel risky. It keeps the pressure on you in a way that still feels like Resident Evil, even while it's using a different language to do it. And I feel like that's really the best way to describe what this remake achieved. It preserved the heart of RE2, the survival dread, the feeling of being trapped in a place you're trying to learn while it's actively trying to wear you down. It just delivers that feeling through different rules. That's where the identity is. The story stays paced and functional, keeping the urgency tight while the gameplay does the heavy lifting. All of that adds up to a game that earns the fear moment by moment, and the divisiveness around it makes more sense when you look at it that way, because that split came from the game committing to bold choices that shaped how it plays, flows, and how it connects to people's memories. When you remake something as loved as RE2, you're always stepping into expectations that don't match perfectly from person to person. The remake picked a lane. It built a version of RE2 that works as a modern survival horror experience first. The kind of game you can hand somebody in 2019, 2020, 2026, and they still feel the tension the way it was meant to be felt. And after all these years, that's the label I'd put on it. RE2 Remake is the experience rebuilt through different rules. It isn't trying to replace the version you remember, it's just trying to make you feel it again.
What the hell's going on?
Sorry, William. Left me no choice.
And I know there is a part of the RE community that hates the game. You'll still see that they ruined the energy show up anytime the remake gets brought up. And I get where that comes from. People had a very specific relationship with the original, a specific version of the RE2 in their head, and this remake made choices that didn't match what everyone wanted. So I'm not here to tell anybody that they're wrong for feeling that way. If all the changes bothered you, I understand why this remake didn't hit the same. But at the same time, I'm also not going to pretend the remake doesn't land for a lot of people, because it does. It landed for critics and it landed for a huge audience. It landed for me, even with the gripes I had. So the way I look at it now is this. The remake is its own thing, but I feel the game still stands as one of the strongest modern survival horror experiences we've gotten. And that's the Resident Evil 2 remake. If you made it to the end, I really appreciate you. If you enjoyed the video, consider subbing. There's a lot more content on the channel like this, and like I said, there's always more coming. Leave a like and drop a comment also. Let me know how you feel about the remake. And if you feel like helping out extra, sharing the video and hitting the hype button on mobile goes a long way. I also want to give a quick shout out to all the channel members and everyone who supported the channel with super chats during the RE2 stream. That stuff really helps out more than you think, and I appreciate you all for it. But as always, I'll see y'all later.